For those of us who worked with Tandi for the last 12 years or so at the American Friends Service Committee, this is a special moment. All of us have been inspired by her witness, by her life story, by her continual hope that this struggle was going to be won. And I want all of us to welcome Tandi tonight for this special moment and this special celebration. So Tandi Gcabashe.
Thank you very much. Friends, sisters, and brothers, this grand occasion on a beautiful evening in Atlanta is to celebrate and rejoice the triumph of justice, peace, and freedom, and equality over injustice, violence, inequality that characterized South Africa for many decades. We witnessed an end of an era, a powerful moment in history, marking the end of apartheid. We have witnessed a people who had the will to, first of all, survive the pain and suffering of apartheid for many years, and who demonstrated the same strong will against odds at election. Due to this struggle, many of us have had to flee South Africa. I'm a South African, as you know, and I've been in exile for 24 years. I was one of many who returned to South Africa to vote for the first time in my country. But I know also that many fellow South Africans present in this room who could not make the journey voted in absentia. You too were counted in what constituted the freedom in our country. I want to take this opportunity, though, to acknowledge the Atlanta community, and in particular, the American Friends Service Committee and the Atlanta Quaker meeting, the Friends meeting, for the support they have rendered me over the years. I would also like to ask that all those who traveled to South Africa in our group to please rise and be recognized wherever you are in the room. You see here an indomitable group with courage and spirit. Efforts were made by those who are opposed to democracy to intimidate the international community by increased acts of violence close to the election time. This group said, no, we shall not be cowed. In addition to the courage, the energy and determination of this group that went into managing the financial aspects of this trip is admired and appreciated. As we left Atlanta for South Africa last month, we knew we were about to witness history in the making. Not that we didn't have some fear, some underlying speculation of the possible dangers ahead. It's that all of us who were fortunate enough to be present to represent the Atlanta community in the South African elections were acutely aware that we were about to take part in events that would end an era and give birth to a new nation. That was great. What role were we to play in the electoral process? The African National Congress had requested that the international community be present during the elections. Those of us serving as election observers from the United States, of which there were approximately 200, were in South Africa under the auspices of the Lawyers' Committee for Civil Rights under the law in Washington, D.C. There were international observers as well, also from the United Nations, the Organization of African Unity, the European Community Union, and the Commonwealth. In addition to instructing, guiding the US observers, the Lawyers Committee also assisted the South African Independent Electoral Commission, or the IEC, in the overall observing and monitoring of the election. There were 11 South African members appointed to serve on the IEC, and 5 international. Following the training, our Atlanta group was deployed to 3 separate areas. We went to the provinces of Natal, which I'm one of the people who went to Natal, and some of you may know that this is my home province, so I was at home there. Also, you will remember that KwaZulu-Natal is the province that was plagued by violence most of all. So we were deployed to the provinces of Natal, Eastern Cape. That group went to Mthatha, and the Western Cape, which is Cape Town. What impressed all of us about the elections? What is it that we really got from these elections? That people came out in droves to the polling stations in a way that the IEC could not have anticipated. In fact, it was discovered, somehow shamefully, that all along the South African government's population statistics were far understated. They were understating the black population. Oh, there could be many reasons for that. Our births were not registered accurately, the deaths as well, and a myriad of other reasons. What else impressed us during those days of election? There were those long lines in the rain, in the hot sun, from dawn to dusk. Often people waiting in line without food or water, and yet people waited patiently and tenaciously to make their mark on the ballot. That mark was so important to all of the South Africans who stood on those long lines. It was a mark of their life. We want to say also that in some instances, people returned on the 2nd and 3rd day before they could vote. There were several reasons for this. The IEC, of course, was charged with organizing and supervising this election, and then finally declaring it free and fair, and as well as adjudicating in cases of disputes. 4 months was not long enough to organize this efficiently, especially for a country where 84% of the population had not participated in elections before. Also a country where 60% of that 84% is illiterate. And I always am very quick to point out that just because people are illiterate, it doesn't mean they're stupid. They knew exactly where to put that X, the mark, the X mark. The patience and the tenacity was amazing. A lot of the people expressed that they had waited all their lives for this day, and that a few more hours or days in line are worth it. They came from far and wide, some in wheelbarrows, others on stretchers, some were on cane, walking on cane, and some on trains and buses and so on and so forth. Some had their children on their backs. They came. One elderly woman said this to me: "I'm not casting this vote for myself anymore, but for my grandchildren." This is a woman who had suffered and struggled for years and was casting a vote for her grandchildren. My own mother, of course, who is 90 years old, voted as well from a wheelchair. I had hoped that I would cast my vote with my mother, but there was some confusion about the polling station where she was to vote. So I missed that opportunity. But the most important thing is that she voted and I voted as well. My father once said, "There remains before us the building of a new land, a home for all who are black, white, or brown. From the ruins of the old narrow group, a synthesis of the rich cultural strains that we have inherited." We saw the beginnings of that. We saw the beginnings of that in the voting line, which was a culture into itself. People who had never before communicated much across racial lines chatted. They shared experiences. They even shared cold drinks. I saw a few times when that happened while in line. This was a miracle. As Bishop Tutu said, a miracle descended upon our nation on those 3 days. What was most impressive about the election, though, in addition to the long lines, was the involvement of the South Africans in every step of the way, from voter education to the campaigning, to the voting, and to the counting of the vote. People were brought close to the process. They now have ownership in the intricate processes of democracy. You really felt that people had a feel for this election in their hearts and minds. At the voting centers as well as in the counting centers, South Africans were presiding officers. They were voting staff. They were peace monitors. They were enumerators counting the votes. They were observers. They were party agents. They were voting citizens. It all happened at once. The counting of the vote. I must mention the counting of the ballots because it was fascinating. I'm sure my colleagues who are in South Africa with me will bear me out on this one. The painstaking process first of the reconciling of the ballots. There had to be a balance between the ballots that were sent to the voting station and the ballots that were returned to the counting centers. The unsealing of the ballot boxes, which often generated great discussion and debate. There was not always agreement about whether or not the boxes had been tampered with. There are some wild stories concerning that. I know because I was in KwaZulu, and I was right out in the rural, remote areas of KwaZulu, in a place called Indwedwe. And my other partners, people who were in the group with me, were also at a place called Imbumbulu. Nice names, Indwedwe, Imbumbulu. Now, there was so much of tampering with those ballot boxes that often when we were driving at night through the bushes, we expected to see people carrying ballot boxes on their heads anytime. But that's all part of the democracy that arrived to our people in South Africa. The counting of the votes, it was amazing. After the ballot boxes were opened and there was agreement that they had not been tampered with, then the contents were emptied and then put into, they were counted, and as they were counted, they were held up in full view of everybody, observers, monitors, party agents, so that all of us could see on the ballot the party that has the X mark. Now, remember, there were 23 million people voting in South Africa, and they voted on a provincial as well as a national ballot. That meant that each of those 46 million Mind you, it was over because this census was inaccurate. It was over 46 million. And each one of those ballots was held up to full view until there was agreement that the ballot was valid and to which party it belonged. The inauguration was the crowning event when at the Union Buildings in Pretoria, Nelson Mandela, the prisoner, became Nelson Mandela, the President of South Africa.